The first full day I ever spent on the mountain, I got accused of environmental sabotage by a woman in a turtleneck sweater and orthopedic sandals, while she held a barking Yorkshire Terrier in one arm and a clipboard in the other. I hadn't even unpacked my duffel bag. She stormed up my gravel drive like a SWAT team of one, pointed at the tree near the front of my uncle's cabin, and shouted, "That feeder is illegal. You're baiting predators." At first I laughed. Thought it was some mountain town joke. You know, neighborly hazing. But then she stepped closer, close enough that I could smell a weird blend of lavender oil and stale entitlement, and said, "You're in violation of Mountain Ridge HOA Code 4B. That's a finable offense." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what code?" She didn't answer. She just started scribbling something on her clipboard like I had set off a forest fire. Now, to be clear, I wasn't dumping oil in the creek or building a bunker. I was hanging a hummingbird feeder. One feeder. In a pine tree. On land that had been in my family for 3 generations. 10 minutes later, she was on the phone, voice high and trembling, and before I could get back inside to finish making coffee, 3 police cruisers rolled up the hill and boxed in my truck like I was a drug kingpin. The lead deputy stepped out with a hand on his belt and asked if I was the property owner. I told him I was. Calmly. Then walked over to the truck, unlocked a metal strongbox, and pulled out a copy of my land deed, folded, notarized, and sealed with the county clerk's stamp. He read it. Then he read it again. Looked at me. Then at the woman, still clutching her dog like it was a badge of honor. Then he said, "Sir, this document says you own over 200 acres. I nodded. "Yes, sir. The entire mountain ridge. Including the land her deck sits on." You should have seen the color drain from her face. The dog stopped barking. But I knew this wasn't over. You don't go from calling the cops over birdseed to walking away peacefully. Her name, I'd soon learn, was Debra Lanning. And that clipboard? It wasn't just a prop. It was a weapon. Because this wasn't about birds. Or feeders. Or even rules. It was about control. And Debra wasn't going to give it up without a war. After the cops left and Debra Lanning retreated back down the hill, muttering about bylaws and ecosystem collapse, I sat on the porch of the cabin with a lukewarm cup of coffee, watching steam rise off the rim and wondering if I'd just walked into some sort of surreal HOA twilight zone. The silence returned, eventually. The kind of silence that isn't empty, it hums. The wind rustling through pine needles. The sharp chirp of a chickadee. The creak of the porch swing I hadn't sat on in over 20 years. This place, this mountain, meant something. It wasn't just a patch of woods with good views and no Wi-Fi. It was a sanctuary. It had belonged to my uncle, Walt Radner, a retired Forest Service ranger who had lived up here alone for most of his adult life. He never married, never moved, never compromised. He believed in the rhythm of the land, waking with the sunrise, chopping his own firewood, brewing pine tea when he felt under the weather. No social media. No HOA meetings. No nonsense. When he passed last year, he left the entire mountain ridge to me, his only nephew. He once told me, "Eli, this place doesn't need more people. It needs a watcher. Someone who knows how to listen." And I had listened. After nearly 2 decades patching up military working dogs in desert bases and jungle outposts, I came back stateside and realized the noise of modern life wasn't just around me, it was inside me. So I came here. To rest. To remember. To breathe. And within 12 hours, I'd already made an enemy. Debra Lanning wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was, as I soon discovered, the self-proclaimed president of something called the Mountain Ridge HOA, a name that sounded legitimate until you realized the HOA itself didn't actually exist. No incorporation. No legal foundation. No recorded charter. Just flyers, made on what looked like a 2008 inkjet printer, stapled to tree trunks and mailboxes. I started seeing them everywhere. One said, "Notice, all properties must conform to Environmental Harmony Code. No unnatural feeding. No unpainted structures. No excessive reflectivity. Another accused homeowners of violating soil integrity by using compost bins. Mine had 3 flyers by the end of the week, including a bright red one taped to the side of my shed that read, "Pending HOA investigation, non-compliant structure detected." She hadn't even been inside the shed. I ripped the flyers down, of course, but every time I did, new ones went up overnight. It didn't stop there. One afternoon I hiked the south trail near the ridge border and spotted a laminated sign nailed to a tree, a sign that read, "Mountain Ridge HOA property, trespassers will be fined." The thing was bolted into the trunk with 3-inch screws. Someone had used a level. It looked official, until you read the fine print at the bottom. Issued by President D. Lanning, Community Compliance Division. I stared at it for a while. Then looked down at my boots. I wasn't just standing on a hiking trail. I was standing on my land. That's when it clicked. Debra wasn't just some meddling retiree with too much time on her hands. She was staging something. Slowly, methodically, publicly. Creating the illusion that this mountain belonged to her. Not me. Not my uncle. Not the deed filed with the county 15 years ago. She was trying to rewrite reality. One clipboard scribble and one flyer at a time. So I stopped playing defense. I went into town, bought 2 motion-activated trail cams, a dozen aluminum, private property, surveillance in use, signs, and a drone with 4K resolution and GPS tracking. I spent the next day installing them along the boundaries. Not with anger. With precision. One camera faced the winding path just beyond Debra's house. The same one I caught her sneaking up through on my first morning. Another pointed straight at the cluster of pines near the ridge, where those laminated HOA signs kept popping up. The drone I saved for later, just in case she got creative. By the end of the week, I had a digital perimeter and 3 new flyers accusing me of unauthorized solar installation and visual disharmony due to non-compliant window treatments. The cabin didn't even have curtains. Still, Debra didn't let up. I started seeing groups of people gathering on her back deck every other evening, lawn chairs arranged like a suburban tribunal. Debra at the front, arms folded, talking with exaggerated gestures. I watched through binoculars once. Not to snoop. To confirm what I suspected. She was holding community meetings, disguised as backyard socials, teaching people her rules, repeating them until they sounded real. And from the way some neighbors nodded, I could tell they believed her. Not all, but enough. That's when I realized this wasn't a feud. It wasn't even about me. This was a power grab. And Debra Lanning didn't care who owned what. She cared who looked like they owned it. So I decided to remind her, looks can be deceiving. 2 nights after I posted the surveillance signs, one of the trail cams pinged my phone at exactly 12:43 a.m. I rolled out of bed, still half asleep, and tapped into the live feed. There she was. Debra Lanning, clad in black yoga pants, a powder blue hoodie that glowed in infrared, and a ball cap with a little LED light clipped to the brim. She moved like she thought she was on a stealth mission, tiptoeing through the pine needles, hugging the tree line. In one hand was a roll of masking tape. In the other, another one of her infamous flyers. She stopped at the exact tree where I'd installed a sign the day before, one that clearly read, "Private property, monitored 24/7. She didn't care. Or maybe she just didn't believe it was real. She stuck the flyer right over mine and muttered something to her dog, who wasn't there but whose name, Pixie, escaped her lips like a nervous tick. She stood back, admired her work, then turned to leave. What she didn't know was that I had installed a second hidden camera, 20 feet up in the opposite tree. It got her face. Full color. Clear as daylight. The next morning, I drafted a cease and desist letter. Nothing threatening. Just formal. Calm. Legal. I cited my deed, the county records, and local trespass statutes. I printed 2 copies, slipped one in her mailbox, and hand-delivered the other. She answered the door in slippers and a robe, a mug of something steaming in her hand. I said nothing. Just handed her the envelope. She opened it on the spot and read the first paragraph. Her eyes narrowed. Her lips curled. "You're threatening me now?" she snapped. "No, Debra," I said. "I'm giving you a chance to stop." She scoffed. "You think that cabin makes you the king of this ridge? You don't belong here. You're just squatting on a war relic." Then she slammed the door. I walked back to the cabin, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and watched the treetops sway like they were listening. 2 days later, I found a news sign nailed to the bottom of my driveway. Hand-painted on a piece of warped plywood were the words, "Community Watch Zone. Trespassers will be photographed and reported." Underneath, in smaller, shakier handwriting, "Report suspicious mountain men." It was absurd. Borderline comical. But something about it hit different. She wasn't trying to intimidate me anymore. She was trying to erase me. The following week, I noticed a group of neighbors heading into her backyard with folding chairs under their arms. That same night, I found a petition stuffed into my mailbox, tucked between junk flyers and pine needles. It was titled, "Emergency Action, Remove Unauthorized Structure and Restore Environmental Balance." The unauthorized structure was my uncle's cabin. It listed 17 signatures, most scribbled, a few familiar. One of them was Mrs. Yates, who lived 3 doors down and always waved when walking her cat on a leash. I called her. "Did you know what you were signing?" I asked. She hesitated. Debra said it was about controlling noise. "My cabin doesn't even have power yet," I said. "Oh." She was quiet for a moment. "She's persuasive." I thanked her and hung up. Later that night, I heard a faint buzzing outside the window. At first I thought it was mosquitoes, but then the pitch changed, higher, steadier. I walked outside with a flashlight and scanned the tree line. A drone. Not mine. Sleeker. Newer. Matte black with 4 rotors and a bright green sensor blinking beneath the camera dome. It hovered maybe 20 feet above the cabin, slowly panning left to right, like it was scanning a crime scene. When I took a step forward, it tilted and zipped away, low and fast, back toward Debra's side of the ridge. I didn't chase it. I didn't need to. But I was done waiting. The next morning, I drove into town and met up with Frank McGill, a retired forest ranger who had worked these hills long before Debra's porch was even built. Frank was a wiry man with a thick gray beard, sun-leathered skin, and a voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. He had no love for drama, but when I showed him the footage and the flyers, he whistled low. "She's out of line," he said. "These trees don't belong to any HOA. And you're not the first she's tangled with." He offered to walk the property line with me. That afternoon, we hiked the southern ridge, me with a topo map, him with a compass and a steel survey spike. That's when we found it. A section of Debra's massive back deck, including her outdoor fire pit and HOA welcome table, extended nearly 30 feet into my land. Frank triple-checked the markers. "She's encroaching," he said flatly. "No question." That evening, I opened the metal lockbox in the cabin and pulled out a card I hadn't touched in years. Trent Kessler, real estate attorney. We'd gone to college together. I patched up his golden retriever once when it tore a tendon on a hiking trip. He owed me a favor. When he answered my call, he didn't sound surprised. "She's pushing fraudulent HOA claims, right?" he said before I finished the sentence. I laughed. "You've dealt with this before?" "More than you'd think." "Send me everything you've got." I uploaded the drone footage, trail cam videos, pictures of the flyers, boundary maps, and GPS overlays. 2 hours later, Trent called back. "I'm drafting a formal complaint for civil encroachment and property harassment," he said. "If she doesn't back off, we go to zoning court." "I don't want revenge," I told him. "I want her out of my land. Out of my face." He paused, then said something I wouldn't forget. "Then let's give her what she's earned, nothing more, nothing less." That night, I stood at the edge of the ridge, looking down at Debra's deck, her little fake empire, and watched as solar lights flicked on in neat little rows. It looked organized, polished, powerful. But now I knew the truth. She'd built it on lies. And on land that wasn't hers. What came next wouldn't be personal. It would be precise. And she wouldn't see it coming. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp at the county zoning office, an old brick building in town with rusted metal letters above the door and a waiting room that smelled like paper and lemon disinfectant. I wore jeans, boots, and a forest green flannel shirt, nothing fancy. Trent showed up in his usual understated gray suit, carrying a laptop, a leather-bound folder, and a long cardboard tube that held a map over 4 decades old. Debra Lanning, on the other hand, arrived like she was storming the Senate. Beige power suit. Big sunglasses. Glossy binder under one arm, a homemade poster board under the other. 2 neighbors flanked her, both looking like they regretted showing up the moment she started talking. We didn't speak. She didn't even glance at me. Inside the meeting room, a panel of 3 county officials sat behind a folding table with microphones. A zoning commissioner named Barnes called the room to order. Let's begin with the petitioner. Mr. Kessler? Trent stood and moved with the calm confidence of a man who had done this 100 times. He began with the deed, my uncle's original transfer, notarized and recorded 15 years ago. Then came the historical maps, courtesy of Frank McGill, showing the pre-construction boundaries of the ridge. Then drone footage. Trail cam images. Screenshots of Debra trespassing. GPS overlays of the deck footprint. Photographic evidence that nearly 1/3 of her community platform extended over 30 feet into my land. Every step was logical, neutral, and meticulously documented. Trent didn't embellish. He didn't mock. He let the evidence speak. When he was finished, the room was silent. Then Commissioner Barnes turned to the other side of the room. Ms. Lanning, your response? Debra stood with dramatic flair and immediately launched into a monologue. This is not just about property lines, she said, waving one of her poster boards, which featured a blown-up image of my lookout tower with the word surveillance threat scrawled in red marker. This is about preserving the spirit of this mountain, the harmony of our community, and the unauthorized militarization of the ridge. I almost choked. She continued, flipping through her binder like a dramatic actor searching for a forgotten script. At one point she accused me of psyops tactics because of the drone footage, and claimed I had forged the maps with artificial intelligence. Then she produced a printed document labeled Mountain Ridge HOA Charter, complete with a gold sticker and a signature line that read, President and Founder, Debra Lanning. Commissioner Barnes accepted the paper, glanced at it, then handed it back without a word. This document, he said calmly, has no legal standing. There is no registered HOA for this area on record with the county or the state. Have you ever dealt with someone like Debra? Drop a yes in the comments if you have. But we've had meetings. Debra stammered. Informal gatherings, Barnes said. Not a governing body. Debra's face flushed. Her voice cracked. She accused the commission of being biased, said Trent was clearly in cahoots with the sheriff's office, and finally pointed at me and shouted, He's trying to erase me. He wants to destroy the community I built. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. The room did. A woman in the back, one of her former supporters, actually shook her head and walked out. Another man folded his arms and leaned back like someone who had just woken up from a long nap. The illusion was breaking. Commissioner Barnes leaned forward, cleared his throat, and said, Based on the evidence presented today, we find that the structure identified as Ms. Lanning's deck does, in fact, extend approximately 31 feet onto the adjacent parcel owned by Mr. Eli Radner. This constitutes a zoning violation and qualifies as an encroachment under current municipal code. He looked directly at Debra. Ms. Lanning, you will have 30 days to either initiate a legal boundary adjustment and purchase agreement, or begin removal of the encroaching structure. Failure to comply will result in legal action initiated by the county. Debra didn't speak. She didn't even blink. She just sat down slowly, staring at her crumpled poster board as if it had betrayed her. The hearing adjourned. The gavel fell. People began to file out. Outside, I stepped into the fresh mountain air and looked up at the clear blue sky. Trent clapped me on the shoulder. "She's finished," he said. "Even if she doesn't know it yet." But I didn't feel like gloating. Not even a little. As we walked toward our cars, Debra stood at the edge of the parking lot alone, her sunglasses off now, her face pale, lips tight. She didn't yell. She didn't sneer. She looked small. And maybe for the first time, quiet. I approached her. Not to gloat. Not to poke the wound. Just to end it. "You don't have to tear it all down," I said quietly. "Just stop the flyers. Stop the meetings. Stop pretending this place is yours to control." She stared at me for a long time. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. I didn't follow. Back at the cabin that evening, I stood on the lookout tower and watched the sunset spill gold across the ridge. The trees swayed in the wind. The air smelled like pine and finality. For the first time in weeks, there were no flyers on my fence. No drones overhead. No barking dogs echoing across the ravine. Just stillness. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't fought fire with fire. I'd stood my ground. Let the truth speak. And the mountain had listened. A month after the hearing, I got a call from a man named Calvin Pierce, local real estate broker with a voice like soft gravel and the manners of someone who hated delivering bad news. He asked if I might be interested in expanding my holdings on the ridge. I told him politely. I already own the mountain. He chuckled. Not quite all of it. Then he paused. Debra Lanning's property has quietly gone up for private sale. No listings. No signs. Just a few backdoor calls to select buyers. Word is, she's looking to disappear. I didn't speak for a moment. Not out of hesitation, just surprise. I asked the price. It was higher than it should have been for a house with a disputed deck and a reputation that lingered like burnt coffee. But I didn't negotiate. I had Calvin set up a limited liability company, Northridge Conservancy, and made the purchase through that. Debra would never know it was me. 2 weeks later, the deed was signed. Her house was now mine. She left before sunrise. No farewell. No final flyer. No last glare. Just a dusty blue SUV rolling down the mountain road, brake lights blinking once as she turned onto the highway. I watched from the tower, coffee in hand, heart strangely quiet. And then, I walked the trail behind her old house. Stopped at the corner where her deck had pushed over my boundary. The same place where she had once hosted fake HOA meetings, held up flyers like law, and declared herself queen of the ridge. I planted a small wooden sign in the ground. Welcome. Nothing more. If you think Eli handled it perfectly, comment 1 below. Let's see how many agree with that move. I didn't touch the house for a week. Let it sit. Breathe. Shed whatever weight it had carried under her rule. Then I got to work. Not out of vengeance, but intention. I stripped the wallpaper, floral, faded, and suffocating. Tore down the fake Community Watch signs she'd nailed to the pantry. Removed the broken wine fridge she used to keep next to her lawn chair. Command post. Then I opened the windows. Let the mountain back in. Ridgeview Lodge took shape slowly. A fresh coat of cedar stain. 6 bunk beds. A refurbished wood stove from a yard sale down in town. Bookshelves filled with field guides, maps, and journals. I added hooks for hiking gear. Installed rain barrels for water catchment. Built a long bench facing the valley. I wasn't building a retreat. I was building a place for people who needed space, the kind you can't find behind gates and fences. I wrote a few letters. Quietly. Carefully. One to a local veterans shelter. Another to a group that helped park rangers decompress after wildfire deployments. One to a nonprofit that supported wildlife researchers and environmental volunteers. There was no brochure. No website. Just an invitation. The first guest was a former Army medic who brought his teenage son. They stayed 3 days. Hiked every trail. Left a note in the guest book that said, "Didn't think silence could be this loud. Thank you." Then came a woman who had just finished chemo. She sat by the fire and wrote in her journal for a week straight. Never spoke. Just smiled on her way out. By spring, Ridgeview Lodge was alive. Not crowded, just full in the right way. Nina, the young freelancer who once signed Debra's fake petition out of fear, stopped by with a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "Ridgeview, where the wild belongs." Frank McGill donated a rugged old desk he'd used in the ranger station since 1984. Said it deserved one last good view. Even the local sheriff drove by during his regular patrol, rolled down the window, and gave me a thumbs up. "Place looks better without the flyers," he said. We both laughed. Debra's name stopped coming up. Not because people forgot, because they healed. And you can't heal while keeping scars in front of you. One neighbor, Mrs. Yates, baked a pie and left it on the porch with a note. "Thank you for keeping the mountain honest again." I didn't answer. Just left the pie plate washed and returned with a sprig of rosemary from the new garden bed. I didn't want credit. This wasn't about legacy. It was about peace. And peace doesn't arrive with applause. It settles like mist, quiet, constant, and earned. One evening, I sat on the deck that used to belong to Debra Lanning. It faced west now, the railing rebuilt with pine and stone, wildflowers sprouting through the cracks where artificial turf had once been glued down. I opened the old field notebook my uncle used to keep. Inside the front cover, he'd written, "Land remembers what we forget." I smiled, pulled out my pen, and wrote beneath it, "I didn't win this mountain with noise. I earned it with silence, patience, and truth." Then I closed the book, leaned back in the chair, and watched the sun drop behind the ridge. No flyers. No shouting. No lines in the sand. Just forest. Just wind. Just home. Love stories where justice wins quietly? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next wild HOA showdown. If there's one thing this mountain taught me, it's that real power isn't loud, it's rooted. In a world where people like Debra Lanning weaponize fake authority to control and intimidate, it's easy to feel cornered or alone. But when you know the truth, when you know what's yours, and you protect it with quiet strength instead of noise, you win more than an argument. You earn peace. This wasn't just about a property line. It was about dignity. About standing firm without becoming cruel. About choosing documentation over confrontation, patience over pride. We all face, Debras, in life, people who believe they can redraw your boundaries with just a clipboard and enough nerve. But you don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to fight dirty to defend what matters. Sometimes the best revenge isn't payback, it's rebuilding. It's reclaiming space with purpose, turning conflict into community, and leaving something better than what was taken from you. The flyers are gone. The fear is gone. But the lesson stays. Let the loud ones burn out. Stay grounded. Stay steady. And let the mountain speak for you.